Well, the gospel today speaks to us about the Sea of Galilee, but as we know, it's actually a freshwater lake. But it is rather large, 13 miles long, 5 miles wide, and it was used for a lot of fishing. In January of 1986, that area was in the middle of a 3-year drought, and the level of the lake was very low, and kind of like Cheney Lake is right now. And you could go and go out pretty far where the water used to be on the shore. And so there were these two brothers that were looking around there to see what they might find. And they found some coins, and then they kept looking, and sticking out of the mud, they saw one nail. They went over and looked at the nail, and it was very old. And so they pulled on it. A second nail emerged, and they realized that it was the nails were attached to some wood. And so they dug a little further in the mud, and they realized that this was something very old. And so, to make a long story short, they went and found the proper authorities, and they came back, and what they discovered was an intact boat that was 2,000 years old. It was from the time of Christ, from the time of Jesus, when he was on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And it's a quite amazing story about how they unearthed it and how they cared for it, and now it's in a museum there in Israel. And they call it the Jesus boat. So if you want to look this up, it's pretty simple. Jesus boat, okay? And you can take a look at it. They don't know if Jesus was in this boat. At that time, there was probably 600 boats on the Sea of Galilee, and so maybe it was. The story we heard, there were several boats in there. But what we know about this boat is it's 27 feet long, which would fit here within the church with about 5 feet on either side. It's about 7.5 feet wide, and it's only about 4 feet deep. And it had a mast, and it was made out of oak and cedar and like 8 other kinds of wood, because it was used for several generations and patched many times over the years. And eventually, of course, it sunk. And the reason why I'm telling you all about this boat, to give you some context of what Jesus and the others would have experienced that night on the Sea of Galilee. It is not the type of boat that you want to be in a violent storm with. It is not a deep boat. It's not a big boat. It can hold 4 people up to 16 people, and it would be really amazing. So we hear in the gospel about a boat similar to this, and there's a violent storm that happened often on the Sea of Galilee because of the geography around it. Sometimes these strong winds would come up out of nowhere and create these large waves. And we heard that the boat was sinking, or it was taking on water. It was becoming swamped. And Jesus is in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow, which to me, that's the first miracle, sleeping through something like that. I would have been violently sick at that moment. But Jesus, there he is sleeping, and they're terrified. And these aren't just ordinary men. These aren't people from Kansas. These are fishermen that have spent their whole life on this lake, and they're terrified of what is happening. But Jesus wakes up, he rebukes the wind, he calms it down, and there's a great, great peace. And this was no accident. Jesus did this as a test for his disciples. He wanted to teach them about having faith and not being afraid, that they were going to need this as they went into their mission. And so he allowed this to happen. Why? Because Jesus is the creator of all things. As we say in the Creed, through him all things were made. And so if he wants to calm a storm, or if he wants to allow a storm to happen on the Sea of Galilee, he can do that. And he did that so that he would test their faith and to make it grow. And so it's a great story, but we can also apply it to our own lives. St. Augustine said that we can look at our hearts like little boats. And he says, at times there's wind and there's waves that threaten those little boats of our hearts. And he said, if you are insulted, that's the wind. And then you become angry, and that's the waves. And you feel like you're being swamped and you're going to be overcome. And he said, the reason why is that Jesus is asleep in your heart. You have forgotten the Lord, and you need to wake him up and remember him. And we can apply that to other things in our life, because we know there's always storms that come in life. Unless you're very young, you know this because you've experienced it. You know that there have been storms in our life, that there maybe currently are storms that are going on, and that there will be some to come. These storms can be many different things. Maybe they're illness in ourselves or someone we love. Maybe they're like financial difficulties or problems at work or challenges with our family or concern for what's going on in the world or what's going on in our nation or what's going on in our church. All of these things are violent storms that come up in our lives. And the proper way to deal with these things is by having that center of our hearts in Jesus and allowing him to be alive and awake in our hearts so that he can calm the storms, that he can bring peace, that he can show his love and allow us to have faith in those moments of trial that we all experience. And so, as St. Paul said in our second reading today, we are a new creation if we are in Christ, and he lives within us, and we want him to be awake within us as well. And if he lives within us, then we live for others. We don't live for ourselves. And we live with that conviction that he is the Lord and that we do all things out of love. And so today I just want you to think about that. How is Jesus doing in my heart? Is he awake? You know, when people come to me and say, Father, this is what's going on in my life, I might ask them, do you pray every day? Do you go to Mass every week? Are you approaching the sacrament of confession on occasion? Do you read the scriptures? Do you read some spiritual book? And they might say, I'm too busy for those things. If we knew the value of those things, we wouldn't be too busy for them. And if we knew how they could allow us to conquer our fear and have faith in the midst of our doubts and our storms of life, then we would do those things. And so that's what we need. Jesus in our hearts, alive and awake, so that we can sail through the storms with confidence.